In part one of this lecture, we created this message app that was able to use interpolation and expressions in order to output some messages that we set on the $ scope inside of our controller. What I'd like to do now is show you something a little bit more fun, but at the same time demonstrate that the expressions don't necessarily have to go only in the body of tag. They could also be part of tags themselves. And using that technique, you could actually achieve something pretty neat. So I'm still located in lecture 11, folder 11 in the full stack course 5 examples folder. And the only thing that I added is I added a couple of images. One is called Yakov_fed and the other one is called Yakov_hungry. Both of them are PNG files, so they're images. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create a div. Notice that our div is sitting inside our div that is annotated with attribute of ng controller. It has to be inside if we were to communicate with that particular controller's scope object. And the only reason we're making a div here is just to separate visually these messages from what we're about to do. So what we want to accomplish is have an image displayed in the web page that is going to be something like Yakov that's hungry, and then we're going to have a button that says feed Yakov, and when you click that button, the image should flip to the other image that's Yakov fed. In other words, Yakov has been fed. So we're going to start with creating a button, and the button is just going to say feed Yakov. And on click of that button, we want to do something. But since we want the Angular and the controller to handle this on click, so we're going to say ng click. So on ng click, we want some functionality to occur, meaning the flipping or the changing of the image. So we'll just say feed Yakov, and that's going to be our function that we're going to have to implement. And so far, so good. So we'll go ahead and put maybe a break here. And usually I would style this very well, but since we're concentrating on functionality, right now, ugly web page is good enough. And now we need to have a placeholder for this image. So we'll say img, and the source, we'll leave the alt for now out of this. And the source is going to be images, since the images are located in images, and slash Yakov underscore, and here's where we don't know which image to display yet. We want to display the image that is kind of Yakov's state, right? And Yakov probably originally is hungry and then he's fed, but we don't know that. So we need to put our expression here, and that's what we're going to do. Here we're going to say state of being. What is Yakov's state of being? And of course, after that, since it's going to get concatenated, or otherwise known as interpolated here, we need to put the period and PNG. So it'll be Yakov underscore, if the state of being is fed, then it'll say fed.png, or hungry, it'll say hungry.png. So let's go ahead and take a look at our web page, and you can see the feed Yakov button is here, and we're getting an error here, and kind of makes sense since we don't really have an image yet, because it's just an expression, and we haven't really set those variables on the $ scope yet. So let's go back to our code editor, and we need to define the state of being property, and also define the function called feed Yakov. Let's go ahead and go to app.js, and we'll go ahead and add another property on scope called state of being, and we'll call that hungry. So that's the first state of being. We'll put another space in here. And if we save that and go quickly to our web page, you'll see that the image now is showing up. So we have the image, that's the Yakov underscore hungry image that's showing up. You'll see that we're still getting this 404 error, and because it can't find the image, and that's kind of strange, but we'll take a look at that in a minute. Let's go back to our editor and still need to define the message, because if we do this right now, let's go back. If we do this right now and click feed Yakov, nothing is really going to happen because we don't really have that defined yet. So let's go back to our editor and define the function feed Yakov. We need to obviously put it on the scope. So we'll say feed Yakov, there it is popping up here, and it's a function. We don't need the name. We'll put a semicolon here. And all we really need to do is switch our state of being variable to be fed after it gets clicked. So let's go ahead and say scope.stateofbeing is equals fed. So we save that. Let's go back to our browser. So let's minimize this a little bit more. And so when we click feed Yakov, now the different image shows up. Obviously Yakov looks all happy and the cookie is almost gone. But what's strange here is if you take a look at our console, we're still getting this error that it's not found. So this image is not found. Now, why is this image not being found? Well, actually, that makes 100% sense. Because HTML gets processed sequentially. And when this HTML page is being processed line by line, By the time it gets to this image, the line, and processing the image, our state of being is not yet defined yet. In fact, AngularJS has not yet processed this chunk of HTML and hasn't yet looked for these placeholders and substitute these expressions with values. So what ends up happening is that the browser gets this line and tries to fetch this image at this URL. And of course, this is a bogus URL if it still has those mustache and curly braces in it, and therefore it gives you a 404. But once, of course, Angular takes care of this, it substitutes this URL for the proper one, and then we still see the image, but yet the 404 error message remains in our console. So how can we take care of this? Well, we cannot take care of this using regular HTML tricks, but we can take care of it using Angular. We need somehow to tell the browser not to try to fetch this URL, but at the same time fetch it only when Angular is ready for interpretation of these placeholders. Well, one way of doing it is to put an Angular attribute on here instead of the standard HTML one. And the Angular attribute is just ng-source. So if we save that now, go back, you'll see that there's no errors anymore because the image only got fetched once Angular got a hold of this HTML and translated all the expressions into their values. And now if we refresh the page again just to make sure, even though browser sync is working here, now you see Yaakov with a cookie, and if you click feed Yaakov, our state of being variable that is saved on the scope, on the $sign scope, will change its value to _fed. And now Yaakov is happy because he ate almost a whole cookie. So what we've seen in this part of the lecture is really nothing super new, but you've seen another expression or another idea of how to use expressions, and since you could use expressions even inside the attribute values, you can achieve pretty interesting behavior that otherwise would be pretty difficult to implement.